We know what a percentage is now, and we learned how to convert between percentages, decimals, and fractions, and also back from fractions to decimals to percentages. Now, we want to learn how to fill in some of the missing pieces. We're going to look at 3 different scenarios today. The first is we want to know how to find the percent of a number. Second, we're going to look at finding the percent of one number is of another. And then finally, we're going to look at finding a number when the percent is unknown, or when the percent is known, sorry. So basically, we've got different pieces. We've got percentages, we've got numbers, and then we've got the second number. 2 numbers and a percentage. One of those pieces is going to be missing, and we need to learn how to find the missing piece based on the given information. So first, let's look at finding the percent of a number. Let's say we go out to eat, we get a bill for $78, and we want to leave a tip for 20%. How do we do that? We've got a couple options in figuring out this. First option is we set up a proportion. So remember, percentages are a ratio where the denominator is 100. So if we want 20%, we set up that ratio as 20 over 100. And now we want an equal proportion with $78. So 20 over 100 equals n, which is the amount of our tip, over 78. Now we've got our proportion. We're going to solve for n by cross multiplying. We come up with 20 times 78 divided by 100. Our tip should be $15.60. The other option, instead of setting up a proportion, is we can set up an equation. So we can say 20% of 78 equals n, or what? Alright, now we convert 20% to a decimal. We have the following: 20 cents, 0.20 times 78 equals n, which leads to n equals 1560 again. Remember, when we wrote that as an equation, I said 20% of 78. If you remember, when we use the word of, that represents multiplication. Equals represents the word is. Alright, for the second thing we want to look at finding the percent one number is of another. So, suppose I want to know what percent 64 is of 144. How do I do that? Okay, again, we have 2 options. We can set up a proportion, 64 over 144. That's the ratio we've been given. Now, we want to know in terms of percentage, so that means our denominator is going to be 100. So we have our percent over 100. And again, we're going to cross multiply and solve for n, giving us 44%. Again, the second option is to use an equation. P times 144 equals 64. And if we read that, remember the word of often represents multiplication. So we would read that as, what percentage of 144 is 64? Solving that, again, we come out with 0.44 or 44%. So let's look at a real-world example here. So we have 4 friends who volunteered to cut the grass at the neighbor's house. It says Jay cut 23% of the grass, Amy cut 1/5 of the grass, Ken cut 0.31 of the grass, and Brian cut the rest. So we want to know, what percentage did Brian cut? Now this is going to use what we learned in our last lesson. We know that Jay cut 23%. Now we need to convert the 1/5 and the decimal 0.31 to percentages, so we know how much is left and how much Brian cut. 1/5 becomes 0.20 as a decimal, which equals 20%. So remember, we convert 1 divided by 5, it gives us 0.2, and then we multiply by 100 for percent. 0.31, we multiply by 100 and add the percent sign, so we've got 31%, 20%, and 23%. We add them all up, so between Jay, Amy, and Ken, they cut 74%. Now Brian cut the rest. We subtract 74 from 100. So Brian cut 26% of the grass. Another example here. The city of Dallas, Texas has a population of approximately 1,189,000 people. The population of Austin is 55% the population of Dallas. To the nearest thousand, what is the population of Austin? Again, we look at what do we know. We know that 55% of 1,189,000 is the population of Austin. Now we convert that, remembering that of represents multiplication and is and equals correlate when we have word problems. So as an equation, we have 0.55 times 1,189,000 equals n. N evaluates to 653,950, but remember we asked for this answer to the nearest thousand, so we come up with, we're going to round up to 654,000. If we set this up as a proportion, you'll see that you get the same result. Okay, the last bit that we want to look at is supposing we know the percent. Now we want to find a number when the percent is known. So as an example, if I told you that I left $42 for a 15% tip when I went out to eat, what was the cost of the meal? In other words, 42 is 15% of what number? So we know the percentage and we know the amount. Now we want to know what is the number that was a percentage of. Again, remember, equals represents the word is and multiplication represents the word of. So we've got the following equation. 42 equals 15% times n. And we need to take 15%, we need to convert that to a decimal so we can use it in our equation. 15% equals 0.15. So that gives us 42 equals 0.15 times n. When we evaluate this, we have n equals 42 divided by 0.15, which equals $280 would be the cost of our meal. Another example. Anna earned 85% on a test by answering 17 questions correctly. If each question was worth the same amount, how many questions were on the test? Again, what do we know? 85% of n of what number equals 17. Translated to an equation form, of translates to multiplication. So 0.85 times n equals 17, evaluating to n equals 17 divided by 0.85, which equals 20 questions. Now, we just want to look at this as we set it up as a proportion. We have 17 over what number? We want to know the number. Equals 85 over 100. The 85 over 100 represents our 85%. So now we're going to cross multiply, giving us n equals 100 times 17. Divide that by 85, and again that gives us 20. So we looked at our three options. Now we want to look at just a quick summary. We have the problem. Our first problem, finding the percent of a number. And again, we see the equation. We have whatever percent, 15% of 120 equals the number. Also set up as a proportion, 15 over 100 equals n over 120. Also we have the problem of finding the percent one number is of another. So we have, as an equation, we have p% of 120 equals 18. Set up as a proportion, you have p over 100, representing our percent, equals 18 over 120, representing the two numbers that we were given. And our last option is finding a number when the percent is known. So we have here 15% of n equals 18, or as a proportion, 15 over 100, which is our percentage, equals 18 over some number that is unknown.